Livestream starten. Ha, jetzt. Wenn man es einmal im Jahr macht.
Ja, klar. Ich habe es noch nie gemacht, so von daher bin ich froh, du machst es.
Ja. Jetzt läuft's. Sehr schön. Also, herzlich willkommen, liebe Schülerinnen und Schüler, liebe Lehrkräfte. Mein Name ist Jasmin Nasruddin vom Deutsch-Amerikanischen Institut Tübingen. Ich bin hier für die Schulprogramme verantwortlich und freue mich, Sie und euch zum heutigen Abitur-Vortrag begrüßen zu dürfen. Heute geht es um den Roman Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. Bevor wir anfangen und ich es unserer Referentin übergebe, möchte ich noch ganz kurz eine Regel eigentlich im Grunde vorstellen, und zwar, dass Sie und ihr die Möglichkeit habt, Fragen zu stellen, und zwar über den YouTube-Chat. Der wird von mir und einer Kollegin betreut, sodass wir dann immer die Fragen an unsere Referentin Jessica Strain weitergeben können. Und natürlich wird sie Ihnen und euch auch Fragen stellen und ihr könnt sie im Chat beantworten und ich spiele sie ihr wieder zurück. Unangebrachte Kommentare werden gelöscht, das ist klar. Worauf ich euch auch noch und Sie hinweisen möchte, ist unsere Online-Lesung, die wir mit Tom Franklin hatten im Februar, was auch noch auf YouTube zur Verfügung steht. Den Link dazu finden Sie auf unserer Webseite und aber auch unter diesem Video in der Beschreibung. Und morgen haben wir dann nochmal einen Vortrag zum Film Gran Torino. Und beide Vorträge, also der von heute mit Jessica Strain, der Vortrag zu Gran Torino, morgen Abend sowie die Online-Lesung sind auf jeden Fall bis zum Haupttermin des English Abiturs online, das heißt bis einschließlich den 28. April. Das heißt, wenn man vielleicht noch mal ein paar Inhalte vergessen hat, kann man diese noch mal reviewen und sich anschauen und die dann für die Prüfung mitnehmen. Dann möchte ich Sie natürlich auch alle auf unser spannendes Programm hinweisen. Wir haben einmal unser Sprachkurs- und Eventprogramm. Wir haben einmal unser Camp-Programm. Das ist vor allem für Geschwister sicherlich interessant, außer Sie möchten vielleicht auch als Volunteer dabei sein, sowie unsere Jugendsprachreise nach Kalifornien, San Diego wäre sicherlich doch auch eine schöne Belohnung für Sie nach dem bestandenen Abitur, was ich natürlich für Sie hoffe. Gut, dann würde ich eigentlich schon an Frau Strain übergeben und wünsche Ihnen viel Spaß und hoffe, dass Sie zahlreich mitmachen.
Gut. Dankeschön, Jasmin. So, welcome everybody to Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. My name is Jessica, as you guys just found out. I'm half German, half American. So I was born in Bad Wildungen. I don't know if you all know where Bad Wildungen is. It's near Kassel. But I grew up in New York. Not New York City, but New York State, so upstate. So, you know, when we talk about the ambiguity of belonging, I really know how that feels. I belong here in Germany and I belong in the US, but I don't really quite belong in either one 100%. I always feel like there's a part of me missing or a part of me that I can't live in Germany and vice versa in the US. So if any of you have different backgrounds, or even you just moved from, you know, Bayern to Baden-Württemberg, that could be different too. You know how that feels. Right, so we're going to be looking at the novel Crooked Letter today with the umbrella of ambiguity of belonging. So this idea that, you know, our identities and our sense of belonging is never quite clear. And for the characters, especially for the main characters, Silas and Larry, this is a very difficult process in different ways, but a difficult process. If for some reason I speak too quickly or you don't understand something, please write it in the chat. The ladies will be keeping their eye out and they can let me know to slow down or, you know, save your content questions for later. But usually when I'm not doing this, oh, sorry, my telephone. I'm sitting in the office here. Yeah, it's my partner's parents. They're probably going to call again. Usually when I'm not doing this online, but in person, we can do a little bit of interactive discussion and I give you guys some, you know, little assignments to do with your partner. And I may pose some thinking questions to you, but I don't really expect you to answer until the end, so to speak, unless you want to. So I might pose a question and you can write it in the chat throughout the presentation and we'll see how it goes. Okay. Yeah. let's just see how it goes. So let me do a screen share so you guys can see the presentation. Oh, I don't want to do that. Let me try it again. Yeah. Wrong one. Here we go. Okay. All right. I hope you can all see the presentation. So let's begin here with Crooked Letter, a journey through the cultural landscape of Mississippi. The first thing that I want to make very clear is that this presentation is not going to allow you to pass your Abi without reading the book. It's supplemental, which means we'll be going through a lot of the themes and ideas and concepts of the book and some background information as well, that will help you sort through the material of the book, rethink the novel, look at it thematically, connect it to your Abi topic. But if you haven't read the novel, you need to do so, all right? Even if you've only read half of it, please finish it. I mean, from a lot of the other Abi topics in the years past, or Abi books, this is actually one that I enjoy reading the most. Half Girl Course is one that was before you guys had, yeah, it wasn't really my novel. It was kind of boring. So anyways, let's take a look at the title. Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. Why do you think, and this is my first question, so feel free to write in the chat if you have any ideas. Why do you think the author named the book, entitled the book Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter? So why do you think that's the name of the book? And there's one main reason, but there might be a second reason as well. So feel free to write your answer in the chat, and the ladies will let me know if there are any answers coming in. I can't see them, but the ladies can. Yasmin?
Yeah, I'm just waiting. I just put it in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give us a second and see.
Feel free, don't be shy. Usually people are very shy online, but you don't have to be shy.
That is very true. Just wait a second. It always takes a little bit of time. We're not a huge group than we were in like the first couple of years. So smaller group, so it might take some time. You can hide behind the chat. Maybe there's something coming in, but not so far.
Okay. If not, sometimes that happens, especially if we're in a smaller group, then it's a little bit of a pity. It would be nice for you guys to be active a little. I know that it's harder when we can't see each other, but it makes for an easy dialogue.
Okay. Now there's something coming in.
Okay, good.
So the first comment is, my guess would be because of the S in Mississippi being kind of, crooked. And the next comment says, it stands for Mississippi. It is a place in America, the South, in which racism exists a lot.
Very good. Yes. So this is the answer I was looking for, these two. Crooked letter absolutely ties back to the word Mississippi. And this is obviously where the book takes place. And when I was a kid, we learned how to spell this word with M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P-I. However, in the South, a lot of children learn to spell it with M-I, crooked letter, I, crooked letter, I, P-P-I, or I, hump, I, or something like this. So quite literally, it refers to Mississippi. However, let's look at it metaphorically. The word crooked, means that something isn't quite straight. It doesn't fit in properly. So this S in Mississippi, it's the strange letter. It's curvy. It's not straightforward. It doesn't fit in. So when we look at that from a metaphoric point of view, we can say that the characters, Silas and Larry, and some of the other characters we meet as well, they don't fit into society, or at least they all have issues fitting in. Silas really worked his way into society very actively, and Larry has no chance whatsoever to fit in because he has very different desires and needs and personality traits to what is expected of a young boy in this community. So you could look at it from a metaphoric standpoint as well as the characters not quite fitting in to the straightforwardness of what the other letters have. So the contents of the presentation today is we're always going to connect it back to the novel of The Ambiguity of Belonging, as I mentioned before. We'll talk about the setting a little bit, so where it takes place with the novel's essence. Then we'll take a really close look at the two main characters. We don't have time or the scope here to look at every character, but Silas and Larry are the ones that, really, they're our main focal point. Obviously, a lot of the supporting characters are really important as well, but those are the two we'll be looking at. Then we'll look at the novel from a thematic approach, a sense of place, childhood, courage, loneliness, and forgiveness. And at the end, I'll leave some time for any discussion questions. The image I chose here really fits to the ambiguity of belonging. It's two masks, two senses of identity. And in the first mask, the left side, the red mask, there are words that have to do with when you don't fit into society, when you feel unseen, left out, alone, discarded, shunned, unwanted, untouchable, forgotten, cut off, lost, alone, abandoned, ignored, deserted, unknown, excluded, neglected, lost, forsaken, disowned, and so on and so on. Almost all of these words, all of these feelings, we can attribute to Larry in one or the other scenes of the book. This is his life, really. This is how he fits into society. He doesn't. He's really alone. He's left out. He's been discarded. He's shunned for a crime he did not commit. He's cut off from friendships and family. He's lost. He's been abandoned by everybody. He's completely excluded. He's been deserted by any friend he's ever had, especially Silas. He's unknown. Nobody really knows him. They make assumptions. Disowned would mean his father really didn't see him as a worthy son. So he was disowned by the family, by his father, not officially, but very unofficially. Neglected. He's been neglected for many, many years. On the flip side, when someone belongs to society, there are other feelings that come to the forefront. They or you may feel admired, received, connected, involved, welcomed, admitted, heard, seen and involved again, embraced, touched, greeted, included, allowed, accepted, recognized, known, desired, honored, thought of, wanted. These are all the positive attributes when you belong somewhere. And these are the ones that Silas strives for actively. He wants nothing more than to be accepted when he was a child. And he knew that he had a big hurdle to overcome. You know, he had a single mom raising him in a shack, and he wants to be accepted. And Larry was sort of a hurdle for him at some point when he entered school. He realized, oof, if I have this friendship with this kid who's really, on the outskirts, will I ever be accepted and included or admitted and welcomed, received? Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail how Silas deals with this. So now again, I'd like to ask for a little bit of interaction if it's possible. I'm going to put up three covers for three different covers for the novel. And each of these covers has an image that evokes a certain theme or idea or scene from the book. So let's take a look at the first one here. You have two, what looks like young children running across the field in what looks like, I don't know, not day, not night. I would call it twilight or dawn. And what does it remind you of? So that's my first question. What does it remind you of? Why was this cover chosen? And I think I'll continue with the other two and ask all the questions at the same time, and you guys can think and write while I'm speaking. The second cover you can see a swamp, a cypress swamp. So this is a very typical landscape of the deep south of Mississippi. And swamps are considered not something positive in human life, so to speak, in our myth, in our stories. I mean, they're just a neutral landscape. It's just a part of nature, but we consider swamps to be scary. They are murky. Things are hidden there. You can't really see below the surface. There might be alligators or crocodiles, depending on where you live. Alligators in the US. And, you know, there's you can't see the bottom. It smells. It's decaying material. We have an idiom in the United States when it comes to political leanings. If there's, you know, the politicians are all corrupt, and then somebody comes in and says, I want to drain the swamp. Funnily, Trump had said he wanted to do this, and Trump is the most corrupt of them all. I know I'm being live streamed, but it's true. Well, maybe not the most, but very, very, very high up there. And draining the swamp, so to speak, means getting rid of all the evil things, right? So we have a very negative association. And the swamp also plays a very important role in the novel. In general, nature plays an important role. Maybe you can think of a scene where we meet this kind of setting. Again, that would be my question. What does it remind you of here? And the third cover, you can see a field overgrown, probably end of summer. The sky is kind of dark, although back here, you know, light, but it's not bright and happy. The house is falling apart, completely abandoned. It's not very hopeful. You know, if we looked at the words we saw before here, lost, abandoned, deserted, forsaken, disowned, left out, discarded, it really fits with the cover of this novel, or of this book here. So what does it remind you of as well? What scene or what idea in the book? Those are my 3 questions for you. Feel free to answer them in the chat. I'll give you a moment. When something comes in, Yasmin can read some ideas.
Yeah, there is already something coming in. Thank you, Maximilian, for your participation. So he says about the first cover, I see a home that is separated from society. I think that might be the third cover,
yeah,
like the one on the right. Separated from the community, so very isolated. And the other one, so that one on the left, he says, the first cover reminds me of Larry and Silas escaping into the woods to have a secret friendship.
Yeah, very good.
And the swamp, so the one in the middle, reminds me of this nickname, Scary Larry. I guess it emphasizes that Larry is being ostracized from the community.
Very interesting. Very creative answers. Yes. Good. Did anyone else have any answers, or no? Then I'll move on. Okay.
Not at this point, no.
Okay. So yes, I completely agree with you, Maximilian. So this is their friendship, and their friendship took place in twilight, so to speak, in an ambiguous time. It was summertime, and summer in the US is this wonderful, especially in the South, wonderful, long, drawn-out affair where you don't have school, you don't have work when you're a child. It's never ending. It's kind of timeless. It's ambiguous. And this is where they meet and form this very important friendship. And it's in this in-between time before, you know, society puts all their burden or expectations upon these 2 young kids. And this was a very creative answer. What else it can remind us of is the second chapter when we meet the character Silas, and he finds Eminem's body, or he's called to Eminem's body in the swamp. And the swamp hides this dead body, this decaying, you know, a horrible corpse, so to speak. And throughout the novel, people go missing and went missing. So, you know, you have Cindy going missing, and then the Rutherford girl going missing, and nobody really quite knows where they are. And they're always going missing or found later in the woods, in the swampy areas of the woods, or in the cabin or such. So that has a lot to do with it. And yes, I agree with you completely here with this abandonment idea. And in the first chapter, when we meet Larry, he's living on his family farm. And it's said that it's like a museum piece, like he hasn't changed anything about it. And if this is the book that I had, this cover. And after finishing the first chapter, when he gets shot, and you close the book and you look at the cover and you think, oh, maybe this is foreshadowing what happens to his life. Hopelessness, he dies and so on, and everything falls apart. Yasmin, you have a comment?
Yes, there are two additional comments. So Lou says the second cover basically shows the unpleasant surroundings of both of the protagonists' lives, and therefore their isolation as well, and spoken literally and metaphorically referring to the situation both grow up and live in.
Very good. That's also a very nice analysis. Yeah. Good. All right. So we'll continue. We won't talk about this one. It's not that important. So let's talk about where this book takes place. Yeah. So I had mentioned before that I'm from New York, which is in the Northeast. Here is New York City. And I grew up about 3 hours north in Albany, New York. So just for size purposes, this is about a 3-hour drive going the US speed limit, which is much, well, it's like 100 kilometers an hour or something like this. And I studied here, south of Rochester in Geneseo. So this is about a 4.5-hour drive. Now going from New York City all the way up here, it's about 9.5 hours, something like this. If we're going to put Germany on this map, it's going to be this size right here. So that should give you the feeling of the sheer size of the United States. If we start in Lisbon, so Lisbon, Portugal, and we fly north, and we take the southern end of the British Isles with us, and then we fly over the tips of Sweden, the south part of Sweden, all the way east towards St. Petersburg, and then we come down through the Balkan states, Romania, Istanbul, and we take this northern edge of the African coastline, North African coastline, over towards Morocco and back up to Lisbon. That entire interior that I just mentioned, that is the size of the United States. Now, within that space here in Europe, we're not only in Europe. This is a huge space. We have multitudes of religions and cultures and languages and political systems and ways of being, ways of belonging that are much, 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 much more heterogeneous in comparison to that space for the United States. That means that for me personally, Mississippi was sometimes further away than Germany. Not necessarily 100% from a cultural aspect, from a geographic aspect. So flying from here to California, I think it's also like 6-hour flight, 5-hour flight, something like this. And flying from here to Germany, it's only an 8-hour flight. So you have to imagine the size now. Now, why am I saying this? Because it is just geographically very, very huge. And most of you, if I ask, where have you been in the US? I will get answers like California, Los Angeles, Nevada, maybe to see Las Vegas, depending on how old you are. Maybe, we spent the time driving down the coast. Some of you may have been in Portland or Seattle, maybe. Some of you might have gone to Florida, New York City, maybe Chicago. And if anybody else has gone anywhere else, it's usual, or maybe Yosemite and Yellowstone, but usually any of the other places, you have either family, very, very close friends, or you did like a au pair year or a study abroad year. This is considered to be, for many Europeans, flyover country, meaning you don't spend a lot of time, you just kind of fly over. So we have the Northeast, we have the Deep South, and Texas, parts of Texas is also part of the Deep South. Then you have the Southwest here. Then you have the Midwest here. You have the Northern Great Lakes states, and you have the West and the Northwest, and then California, the West Coast. And we are talking about the Deep South. And usually we have very distinct associations with the Deep South. So I'm going to ask you guys to quickly just play an association game with me. Go into the chat, and when I say the Deep South of the US, like Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, yeah, here, my mouse. So Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Arkansas. What do you associate with that? What images, what ideas come to mind? And just type words, and there's no right or wrong answers. It's simply what you think of. Hopefully you guys are writing something.
Racism, segregation, civil war.
Yeah, very, very common one. Racism, segregation, civil war. Anything else come in?
That's beautiful landscape, swamps.
Good.
What else? Let's see.
If nothing else is coming in, we can add to it in a moment, but those are some of the very common ones, especially racism, segregation. Sometimes, you know, we get things like slavery, cotton fields. Yeah, most of the time it's a part of history and an idea in history, especially the racism one, that's extremely negative. Yeah, we don't have very many positive associations. Whoever wrote Beautiful Landscapes, maybe you've been there, you've seen it. It's absolutely gorgeous, this region of the United States. And the people are very, very friendly and open. But yes, we associate racism, segregation, the civil rights movement with this region because it does have this kind of bloody past, yeah, this horrifying past, if you may, when it comes to the racial issue. But that's not all it is. And that's really important. We don't want to, you know, whitewash it and say it doesn't exist, but it's one big piece of this history. But Mississippi isn't only racism. It isn't only slavery and cotton fields. It's much more than that. So in order to understand the world, yeah, you have to understand a place like Mississippi. So I'm going to read a couple of names that you probably don't know. William Faulkner, Eudora Welty. It's the birthplace of Elvis Presley, so you do know him. Blues and B.B. King. In order of priority, it's God, family, and football. Rich in folklore, races and charm, y'all. Long, lazy summers, juke joints, river boats, cotton fields, Gulf Coast beaches, magnolia trees, soul food and sweet tea, Southern hospitality. So here we have a much more complete picture of the positive aspects of what Mississippi is, because we already know a lot of the negative aspects associated with it. Now, you probably don't know William Faulkner and Eudora Welty. William Faulkner is one of the greatest American writers. He wrote a lot of novels, or all of his novels, take place in the Deep South and are very intimate glimpses into family life in and generations of Southerners dealing with post-Civil War, dealing with Native Americans, slavery, all of these, you know, very difficult aspects of what these societies were built upon and how they moved on or not. It's very difficult to read him sometimes, but it's worth a try. Why did I choose this? Well, usually, and we're not going to do this now, but if you guys were in class with me, I would ask you to choose certain scenes in the novel that remind you of some ideas here. Now, the most important or the biggest one is in order of priority, God, family, football. Let's take football out. We could put in basketball. We could also put in baseball, and we are going to put in baseball because that's what the sport is in the novel. And what does this mean in order of priority? It's God, family, football. Well, let's look back again to the ambiguity of belonging. In order to belong in the community, and this is true for all communities, you need a way in. Some communities are very open. Some communities are much more closed. Usually, the smaller the community, the more closed it is. Now, this is a very strict generalization. It doesn't hold true for all communities, but the more cut off the community is to the rest of the world, the more closed off it is, the more difficult it is to be different, for the most part. And these three elements, God, family, and whatever sport, let's say baseball here, give you an in to the community. So let's take a look at Silas. His family was very small. He didn't know who his father was. Yeah, we find out later in the book that it was Larry's dad. He doesn't know. He has a single mom who's very poor. They're living in the shack. She doesn't have time to take him to church. She's working. So God isn't a way in for him. Family is not a way in for him because his family already has the burden of, he doesn't have a dad. He's a bastard son, so to speak. And that is not something that is seen as good in this community. So that's not his way in. But he's smart enough to realize he's talented at baseball. This is his ticket into this community. And he knows this. And he exploits this as much as he possibly can, because that gives him the recognition and he's admired and he's seen and he's allowed to belong. Now, Larry actually has a lot of other possibilities to get in. His family is normal in that sense. He's got a dad and he's got a mom and they go to church and his mother's religious. So, the structure seems okay. But he doesn't have the kind of personality, the kind of character traits that in the South, for a typical, family of the South here at this time, especially for the father that he has, are accepted in this family. So he's not accepted by his own family, especially not by his father, who sees him as weak, as not masculine enough, as weird, as strange. And he's not talented in sports. It doesn't interest him. He has other interests, reading, for example. Yeah, science fiction novels. I think it was like Stephen King that he liked to read, something like this. In general, he was a reader. So he doesn't actively try to belong because he's already an outsider from his innermost being and from within his family. Rich in folklore, graces and charm, that's the Southern hospitality. The long, lazy summers, that takes a precedent in the book in the sense of time doesn't really exist. The past flows in with the present. It's always warm and sultry, and we don't feel like there's any seasons passing. Even though we know that these characters grew up, it still feels like nothing has changed. Yeah. And this is something that is often seen in many novels where there aren't as many seasons or seasonal changes. So it feels like time stands still a little bit. It's much easier to count time when you have a clear winter, because right now, we're all waiting for spring desperately. Oh, the flowers are coming out. So we have a sense of time. Where that doesn't really happen, where it's always kind of warm and murky, maybe the summers are just hotter, there's less of a sense of time because you can't see time pass so much. And you can see that in this foreshadowing or flashbacking. Yeah. So if you have time, take a look and think of some other aspects, but I think that's enough said about this. So as I had just mentioned, from a transitional point of view, the past is never dead. It is not even past. This is a quote by William Faulkner, who I mentioned being one of very, very great American authors, and really fits with the novel. Because the past is not dead and it never passed, especially for Larry. Larry is standing still. He's been standing still since that evening where Cindy disappeared, and he was considered the last person to have seen her and accused of, causing her disappearance, murdering her. So for him, it never died. It never went away. And not for Silas either. He realizes what, his actions or inactions, what consequences they cause. And even this community, when the Rutherford girl goes missing, they realized, it's still, nothing has changed. We're being haunted by the past. So what kind of book is this? Well, we have here a social commentary. So it really takes a deep look at the society, this little microcosm in the Deep South. It's a Bildungsroman, clearly, and that's a nice word from German that we've adopted in the English language, like Zeitgeist or Kindergarten, or Gesundheit, we even say that. And it allows these two characters to evolve and develop throughout the novel. And then, and this makes it actually suspenseful, is that it's a detective novel. We don't know. After the first chapter, we think, whoa, what happened? You know, who shot Larry? And is Larry a serial killer? We're not quite sure. We don't want him to be. You know, he's so likable, but he's strange. What's going on? So, you know, it makes you turn the next page. So let's take a closer look at Larry. I chose a quotation for Larry that I think really works through his introspective nature. Maybe Larry was wrong about the word friend. Maybe he'd been shoved away from everybody for so long, all he was a sponge for the wrongs other people did. Maybe after all this time, he'd started to believe their version of him. So here you have a character that is thinking about his life, about who he is, and he realizes, and you know, this is after meeting Wallace, after spending some time with Wallace, that, wow, you know, I never thought I was a bad person. I always was steadfast in knowing who I was. Larry's thinking this, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I am bad or evil, because if I can associate with someone who's evil or has these, you know, horrible urges, and I've been shoved away from society. I'm so removed. I'm so out of, you know, excluded, that I'm a sponge. I take in all the evil things, yeah, of what other people did. And maybe the version of who Larry is from the community is really who he's become. This is really sad, because it just goes to show how he himself is struggling with his identity now. Yeah, he doesn't even know who he is anymore. Yeah, because he's rethinking, does he even know what a friend is? He hasn't had a friend in so long. Was he wrong about the word friend? So how would you describe Larry? Yeah. What, when you were reading the novel, how is he described? And how would you describe this character? I'd like you guys to just write a couple words in the chat if you can, as sort of an, yeah, what you would say Larry is, who he is, or who he was described as in the novel. Give you a minute or so.
Someone says strange. Someone says hot. I'm not sure if that is if that's serious.
I like the bookish types as well. So strange is a very common one, yeah.
Introverted.
Introverted.
Antisocial.
Yeah. Not by choice, I think. Although if you're introverted, sometimes it is a little bit by choice to be outside of society for a while. Okay. These are all great.
Content with himself.
Content with himself. That's a nice one. Yeah. 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 When we look at Silas and Larry in a comparison, we can say Larry was much more content with himself than Silas, who, you know, struggles with his identity much more so.
Racist was also mentioned.
Racist, yeah. When you look at this is an interesting one. We'd have to look closer at the scenes where, you know, he curses out using a racial slur this, you know, young Black girl from the school. But we'd have to really look at, is he really racist? Why did he do it? Does he believe it? Is he just trying out something? He's trying to impress children to get in because he doesn't want to be an outsider. I would argue that we don't know enough about Larry in the book to say if he's racist or not. And I would also argue that he's not a racist from the way he's been described. But he does make made this racial comment when he was a kid. Absolutely. Which was punished for severely. Yasmin, go ahead.
Someone says I don't think he's really racist, just misunderstood. Yeah. He is the typical outsider with a stereotypical nerdish personality. Pudgy was also mentioned. Yeah.
Absolutely. Good. Yeah. So you guys really understood Larry in that sense of how he was seen. Yeah. So he was seen as scary Larry, as the gentle weirdo, as lonely, book-loving, asthmatic, kind, maybe a serial killer is what's going through the reader's mind. And all of the things you guys said. Particularly poignant is that he really is a stereotypical outsider. We all know this kind of person. Yeah. We all have a Larry in our school or in our past or in our family. Maybe we are a Larry. Maybe parts of us are a Larry. And I mean, if you've never been misunderstood, if you've always felt extremely comfortable in every single situation, in every single part of your life, then I would say you've never left your comfort zone, because all of us have had a sense, or should have had a sense, or will have a sense, depending on your life and where you are in your life and how old you are, of not belonging, of not quite fitting in. Yeah, of being excluded or an outsider. And even if it's just a part of ourselves that we hide away, where we think, oof, if I show this part of my identity, this, I will not be accepted, right? And some of us, that's a big part of our identity. And some of us might just be a small aspect, of weird little quirk. And for some of us, it might be our entire identity. And what we show is something completely other, right? And for Larry, who's very much himself, he gets ostracized. This is way before Cindy goes missing, from his father, from school. He is himself, and it doesn't work, in this community. So yes, he's the typical outsider. We don't have time to do the chapter 1 reading here, but I would recommend for you all to read chapter 1 and read between the lines, because it says a lot about Larry's character, how he takes care of the farm, how he goes about his daily life, what he thinks when he's shot, how he takes care of the chickens. It says a lot about his kindness and his good nature, I would say, and also a little bit about his hopelessness. So the next character we have is Silas. Now, I chose a very different quotation, much more straightforward. Silas Jones was his name, but people call him 32. His baseball number, or constable, his occupation. When you compare these two quotations about these two characters, so the way they, are, so to speak, you see that Silas is straightforward, to the point, and he associates his identity with things that are outside of himself. So Silas Jones, his name, but what people call him 32, because he played baseball, or constable, his occupation. So these are the two aspects of his life, his occupation, constable, and his baseball jersey's number, that gave him an in to society. This is how he belongs. This is how what he's worked at to be a part of the society, to get out of his, murky, ambiguous origins with no father, poor mother, a, shanty shack, hand-me-down clothes, no money. And he's worked extremely hard to set those aside, to bury those deep, and outwardly be a very, very clear and admired member of society, right? So what he shows is everything that people admire, a police officer, a baseball star. But in reality, his past, remember, the past is never dead, really, really plays a huge role in his character. He suppresses it. And the novel, for Silas, realizing how he has basically, through his inactions, destroyed any chance for Larry to have a life. this hits him harder and harder as the novel goes on, and he really works through this, and he realizes he can't just be the baseball number and the constable. He has to step up if he really is this upright, courageous person that people believe him to be, and deal with his inaction and deal with the consequences. Now, we don't want to judge him too harshly for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into those reasons in a little bit. So again, how would you describe Silas? Same question, same idea as with Larry. How is he described in the book, and how would you describe him to your friends if he was your friend? Take a minute, please answer that question.
Cool guy.
The typical, popular guy in school. Yeah, you could say that.
Mm-hmm. Athletic, likable.
Good.
Outward, so extrovert.
Yeah, extrovert.
Silas has a great social life. He's great at baseball and got a scholarship with that. He's like the hero of the neighborhood.
Yeah. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Yeah, I agree. Some other aspects, he was poor, as you mentioned before, or as you guys mentioned, local baseball star, Black, which isn't necessarily something that he actively sees as his identity all the time, but it's important for us to analyze in a moment. A good friend. Disloyal is also important. So he's a good friend, but he's also disloyal. Cowardly. Is he cowardly? Or is he, preserving his own self, so to speak, his built self? And then this quotation, something missing inside, is something his mother had said to him once. And he grapples with this. What is missing inside of himself? Is he brave, or is he a coward? So he's also always asking questions about who am I? Am I this version that I show the world, or is there something missing? Right? Good. I'm going to show you guys a video clip. It's going to be a little bit different than the one that I usually show. And what I want you to do, I'm going to do the Freigabe stoppen for a minute because I have to do Freigabe. I'm going to show this video clip. It's about the Freedom Riders, meaning this is at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, where, the time is the 50s, maybe early 60s, early 60s, and segregation was still prevalent in the United States, especially in the South of the United States, especially in Mississippi. And the Freedom Riders were sent from the North in the buses to go into places and simply not go into the segregated areas. They went into the whites only and see what happens. It was a protest. It was a, hey, screw this. We're going to sit at the table for whites because there should be no segregation, right? And this video clip shows how the communities in Mississippi or Alabama, depending, dealt with it, and how racism was still really, really, really prevalent. So this is right before the Civil Rights Movement, guys. This is, you as a Black person, you had no rights, so to speak. The separate but equal is one of those ridiculous myths that they told themselves to make themselves feel better, made themselves think that everything was right. It was bullshit, so to speak. Quite literally. And we're going to look at this because this is a really, really important part of the past. So Larry and Silas grew up later, but their parents, their grandparents, carried this within them. This is the society they grew up in, right? So Silas's mother, Larry's parents, they all were a part of this, separate life, this segregated life. So I'd like to show that to you just so you get an underlying sense of what it was like. Let me just open it up. It's from YouTube, so I hope that it plays well here. Please let me know if for some reason you can't hear or see something.
The speaker was a young Negro riding a bus into Mississippi.
You might have to turn it up.
the clean, modern bus station in Jackson, Mississippi. The battle lines are drawn, the defenses complete. The bus station, dwarfed by the downtown skyscrapers of Jackson, is guarded outwardly by the entire police force of the city. There are others around the corner. Plainclothes deputies wait. Just out of sight, troops are standing, the hot southern sun glinting on their fixed bayonets. For Jackson, Mississippi, the enemy is at the gates. The hour has come. The invaders are 14 Negro and white passengers on an inbound bus. They are vastly outnumbered, even by the reporters covering their journey. The armed might at the bus station waits not to fight, but to protect them from the white population. For unlike Montgomery, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi has decided that by protecting them, they will also defeat them. But everyone, the police, the troops, the town, knows that the riders are only a symbol. The real invader is integration, and he has been long on the road to Mississippi. Other states have bowed to integration, either partially or completely, but not Mississippi, not until now. What happened to bring these two forces together in a bus station, and why Jackson? Well, to find the answers, you must understand first something of the city and its people. The capital of Mississippi is a place where the past has full partnership with the present. Downtown Jackson is dominated by the old Capitol, built in 1833, where the voices of Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson once rang. Confederate memorials are real symbols not only of a century-old conflict, but of a present-day conflict, too. Downtown Jackson looks like any normal, busy town, but people remind you that it was once called Chimneyville, because burned-out chimneys were all that was left after federal troops went through. If you want to know how integration has been held outside Mississippi for this long, you must first call on the Citizens Council, an organization dedicated to states' rights and racial integrity. Support comes from Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and 85,000 living white citizens of Mississippi. The overwhelming political power of the council is well demonstrated by the fact that it is partially supported by state taxes. William Simmons is secretary of the Jackson Citizens Council, editor of its newspaper, and president of its forum, which produced radio and television programs attacking the advance of integration.
The South has a large Negro population. In our state, it's about 42% of the total. And anyone with two eyes in his head and with roughly normal vision can look around him and see that there's a vast and permanent difference between the white and colored people. That, as Abraham Lincoln so wisely said a number of years ago, would forever prohibit them from living on terms of equality in the same society. That, just in a nutshell, is the reason.
How do you, as a Southerner, justify your position in that here is a Negro citizen, he pays taxes, and sometimes he votes, and he's a citizen. How do you justify feeling that he is not, in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of everything that we know of as American and democratic, that he is not your equal?
Well, I don't know the equality in the, I'm really not sure how you mean equal.
Well, I mean equal in every sense of the word.
Well, equality in every sense of the word is obviously a myth. There are no people who are equal, no two people. There are no two races who are equal. They have different qualities, and this is an objective matter that can be determined by objective standards. As far as the more subjective aspects of equality go, we believe in equality before the law for all people. This is something that's quite distinct from individual talent or capacity or accomplishment. I think they're really two separate things.
Well, let's get down to basics. The separate restrooms, the separate lunch counters, things of this type, the separate schools. How do you justify this if you think of him as an American citizen like you are?
Well, I don't see that there's any special connection. Why should the Negro feel any more discriminated against than the white man for associating with his own kind? White people who are segregated don't seem to resent it, and I don't think most niggers resent it. They seem to prefer that.
They do seem to prefer that. Outwardly, they have shown little interest in the battle against integration. There were no Mississippi Negroes among the Freedom Riders. Jackson Negro College students have attempted to use the white library, but even this drew no positive support from the rest of the Negro community. But it is difficult to say what they think, for they have no voice. The nearest to a Negro voice in Jackson is Medgar Evers, for 7 years local secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Just how many Negroes Evers speaks for is open to question, but certainly the majority are not NAACP members.
Well, there are many reasons, I suppose, why we have not had, should I say, the aggressiveness that they've had in Alabama and some of the other areas. One of the reasons is that many of the leaders that have come on the scene have decided to leave and go north and other places, and we are constantly building new leadership here in the state. We feel now that we have gotten to the point that the leadership has become stabilized, and it's a matter now of developing it and refining it. Certainly there has not been the aggressiveness on the part of Negroes as has been in other states, but this is coming into the fore now, especially with the younger people.
There appears to be a lack of leadership among the Negroes, and openly at least they have not asked for leadership. But leadership is on the way, if not from the ranks of Mississippi Negroes, then from elsewhere. One of them is Charles Oldham, National Chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE. CORE is the sponsor of the Freedom Riders, and Oldham their spokesman in Mississippi.
The ultimate goal of our organization is the elimination of discrimination against individuals because of race or color. And this is what we are going to do for America. We feel it is essential for our own welfare, for the welfare of the citizens of the United States. And so that this is our purpose, and we will continue until it is accomplished.
Against this charged background, the issue came to a head. A bus carrying a mixed group of whites and Negroes started across the South with the announced intention of testing segregation in bus terminals, which had been ruled out by the U.S. Supreme Court. The bus was attacked in Alabama, its passengers injured. Next stop, Jackson. Mississippi had observed Alabama's handling of the riders and decided upon another course. The bus was loaded with armed troops and followed by 16 patrol cars and an airplane. All this at a cost of thousands of dollars a day. Jackson citizens watched by the hundreds, jostling each other for a better view. Swamped by the Khrushchev-like protection, the Freedom Riders stepped off the bus, some still bearing the bandages of their encounter with Alabama. They made their way through the surrounding crowd to the inside of the station. Some walked to a restroom marked white only, others to the white-only coffee shop. A policeman ordered them to move on. They stood quietly. Another order, then each was arrested and led outside to a waiting paddy wagon. There was no official mention of segregation or integration. The charges were breach of the peace and inciting to riot. The trial was short. The sentence, a $200 fine, which was suspended. The suspension was refused, and the riders elected to work it out on the county jail farm. Observing Alabama teeming with federal marshals, Mississippi had devised a new method of
Okay, I'm going to stop it here. All right. I hope you guys got the gist of that. I'd like you to think about the film, what you saw, what some of the people talked about, especially maybe the white man who was part of the Citizens Council, which was basically just a very, very racist society, speaking about segregation as being equal and all of this stuff. Maybe you can write your impressions or your ideas into the chat. What did you think about? What did you see? Maybe you also didn't understand something that I could clear up for you. Give you a moment or so to do so. I will open the presentation again as we're waiting. Don't worry about the questions here. That was for a different film. Okay, so think about some of the things that you saw in the film, the documentary, what happened to the Freedom Riders in Jacksonville, Mississippi. Yasmin, has anything come in yet?
Not yet. Ah, yeah. Now it is. Someone is asking, if this would be an actual class, would you guys give me the best oral participation grade? Yes, Maximilian, you're a great participant.
You would get a very good participation grade. Yeah. Even better if you have something to say about the film.
He says blacks did not have many rights and discrimination was bad.
Absolutely. And the way that it was justified should make us all so angry. You know, this man was asked, how can you justify segregation with the idea of equality? And he says, well, it's ridiculous to think everyone's equal. Everyone is different. And then the man asks him, yes, but equality under the eyes of the law, meaning that the law, how you are treated by society, by the government, that you have the same rights. And he says, well, yeah, segregation, you shouldn't complain about segregation. The white people aren't complaining about their segregation. Why should the black people complain? And this should make everybody so angry. Because of course the white people weren't complaining about segregation. They, had wonderful bathrooms. They could sit in the front of the bus. They didn't have to get up when anybody else or when a black person got on. It was vice versa. The black people, no matter how old or young we were, had to get up or leave the bus. They couldn't sit at the counters. They had, movie theaters that were run down, bad school books, no books sometimes. The teachers were paid less. So that argument is mute in a civil rights aspect, but that's how they justified it. They want this. They want to be segregated. And that's how this endemic, systemic racism was justified in these southern states very often, is that's the way it is. They want to live like this, and we're equal. It's just separate, right? But really, really ridiculous. Yasmin, did any other comments come in so far?
No, it's the same awful discrimination.
Yeah. So this is a very important part of the history, is that when segregation was considered to be unconstitutional by the federal government, many of the southern states fought against it. And it's very easy for us to say, well, they're evil. And that's not where we want to go. But it was such a part of the fabric of life. It was, interwoven in the societies. They didn't know how to integrate. And many of them truly didn't want to, not the black people, but the communities themselves, the white people, because they would lose their privilege. They were scared, so to speak. So it was a really long process. Now, if we look at the novel again, right, they don't have a segregated life. It was no separate but equal. It's much later than that. But it still has the smell of it very often. The background, the history isn't far away. Yeah, there's still this fear. Now, let's take a look at Silas, who did not speak up that he was the last person to see Cindy Walker. And we judge him so easily. We say he's a coward, he should have done this. But in a society that even to this day judges black young boys so much more harshly than white young boys, for him to stay silent was probably the smartest thing to do. Because although Larry fell under suspicion, Larry is a white young boy. He wasn't charged with murder. He wasn't thrown away and the key was thrown away into jail and forgotten about. And for Silas, this risk was much, 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 much higher than for Larry. So racism is still a part of that society. And I really want you guys to think about when that question comes on the Abi, it's too easy, too banal to say Silas was a coward. He should have stood up for his friend, or he should have told the truth much earlier. For him to tell the truth in his current situation as a police officer, and so many years later, is a very, very, very courageous act, right? Especially in a climate that still looks at Black young men very differently and treats them very differently from a law perspective, legal perspective, everything like this, than white young men. All right, moving on. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper look at the American Deep South. And this quotation here is from a book that I read in high school. It's also beautifully written, deals with racism, and childhood and identity and a sense of belonging. So it has all the same themes as the Crooked Letter. And if you've never read it, I would highly recommend it. It's really, really a beautiful book about it's from a young girl's perspective of her town in 1932, so in the Great Depression. And her father is a lawyer who defends a young Black man who's been accused of rape. And he didn't rape. He was innocent. But the town, seeing this young Black man associating with a white woman, white girl, wants to see him hang. They want to lynch him. And the protagonist's father, steps in as the lawyer and says, this isn't right. So he fights for justice. And there's another character, Boo Radley, who's we don't know who he is. Is he handicapped? Is he strange? He's very much an extrovert in society. And this young girl befriends him or finds out a little bit more about him. So it's a wonderful, wonderful book. I can just recommend it, but read it after your hobby. Otherwise, things will get confused. And here are the characters describing her hometown. Macomb, this is in Alabama, I think, was a tired old town, even in 1932 when I first knew it. Somehow it was hotter then. Men's stiff collars wilted by 9 in the morning. Ladies bathed before noon after their 3 o'clock naps, and by nightfall were like soft tea cakes with frosting from sweating and sweet talcum. The day was 24 hours long, but it seemed longer. There's no hurry, for there's nowhere to go and nothing to buy and no money to buy it with. So here she's setting up the scene again of what I talked about before, of there not being a sense of time, of everything standing still. It's hot all the time. You're sweating all the time. You're kind of napping, dozing off in and out in these hot, lazy summers. Everybody's poor because it's the Great Depression. 24 hours seem much longer. No one's in a hurry because there's nowhere to go. It's a microcosm. You can't go anywhere. You don't have any money to buy anything. There's nothing to buy. So it's this bubble where life takes place at a very slow pace. Adding to it, now this is from a memoir from someone who grew up in the South, again, adding another piece of the puzzle. Growing up in Fitzgerald, I lived in an intense microcosm. Take a look at the blue highlighted words here too, where your neighbor knows what you're going to do even before you do, where you can recognize a family gene pool by the lift of an eyebrow or the length of a neck or a way of walking. What is said, what is left to the imagination, what is denied, withheld, exaggerated, all these secretive, inverted things informed my childhood. Writing the stories that I found in the box, I remember being particularly fascinated by secrets kept in order to protect someone from who you are. That protection, sharpest knife in the drawer, I absorbed as naturally as a Southern accent. At that time, I was curious to hold up to the light glimpses of the family that I had so efficiently fled. We were remote back behind nowhere when I was growing up. But even so, enormous social change was about to crumble foundations. Who were we way far south? We're south of everywhere, my mother used to lament. So here, the highlighted blue aspects relate directly or indirectly back to Crooked Letter. This intense microcosm, this feeling that the rest of the world doesn't exist. It's only this small community, and that's the world. That's where everybody's life takes place. That the neighbor knows what you're going to do before you do it. Everyone knows Larry killed Cindy. Yeah, that's what people assumed. Your neighbor knows who you are. Even this recognition of a family gene pool, that everyone's kind of related. We find out later that that's true for Larry and Silas. We don't know how they're related in the sense of, was Larry's father in love with Silas's mother? Or was it an affair? Or was she raped? That's also possible. If you look at Larry's father, he was not a nice guy. And the scene with Cindy in the woods where Silas, and Larry watch these two grown men harass this 14-year-old girl. And Silas steps up and says, hey, that's enough. There you see the character of Larry's father. So he was, in my opinion, absolutely capable of something like rape. But it's never talked about because we don't know. These secretive and furtive things of childhood. So all these secrets, all these unsaid things, they still have a huge role in their lives. So again, look back at the quotation. The past is never dead. It is not even past. It's still really a part of the present. Yeah. I'm going to skip these because we did talk about this already and go straight to the theme of childhood. So we meet the characters not in their childhood, but in their adulthood. But then much of the novel flashes back to their childhood. So what does that mean? Yeah, all of us have had, something called childhood. Your grandparents or my grandparents didn't have a childhood. My grandmother was born right after World War I and grew up in World War II, and then she had children. So there was no childhood. She had wartime and no food and bomb shelter raids and all of this. So we are all very lucky that we grew up in a time that was peaceful. And these young boys reflect on their childhood. So this is Silas's reflection here. Was that what childhood was? Things rushing by out a window, the trees connected by motion, going too fast for him to notice the consequences. So him sitting in the car watching things fly by. And he realized, did everything pass by so fast? Did he not recognize that there are consequences to his actions and inactions? Whereas Larry's reflection is a little different. The seatbelt irked his father more than Uncle Colin's not eating meat. So this is talking about Larry's uncle. Because though his father never said it, Larry knew he considered seatbelts cowardly. And so for Larry, the idea of cowardice plays a huge role in his childhood. His father considered him to be not masculine, not a real boy. He didn't want to fight or throw punches, and he, would rather read a book, and he wore a seatbelt. Who did that? So Larry's father did not accept Larry's personality, Larry's being, his essence, his spirit. So he struggles, Larry, with this idea of cowardice, of being considered a coward, being considered weak, his whole childhood. Now, speaking of cowardice or courage here, I'm going to move this little bar. I hope you guys can still see it. We're going to take a little bit of a closer look. So this is Silas thinking about his idea of courage and non-courage and such. And I think this was the waitress, or it was his colleague, I'm not 100% certain, that said to him, well, sugar, she said, limping off, don't be too hard on yourself. Now and again, it's okay to let yourself off the hook, meaning, don't always think you have to be perfect and do everything right. But Silas responds with thinking, well, that was the trouble, wasn't it? Letting himself off the hook had been his way of life. So he realized he always let himself off the hook. For every inaction, every time, he betrayed his friend or didn't stand up for someone or so because of fear of retaliation or not being accepted, he let himself off the hook. And this is really something that we can see, in communities and schools where there's an outsider and you don't agree with how this outsider is treated by your peer group. But do you always step in and say, stop? Maybe some of you do. For the most part, some of you will probably stay silent more often than not, for fear of also becoming an outsider, right? And Silas realized this, that he was so afraid of being being accepted that he let himself off the hook. So that means, that brings us to the idea of what kind of courage do the characters display. There's moral courage, there's physical courage. Sometimes they're mutually exclusive. Most of the time they're a bit intertwined. So we have physical courage, which is bravery in the face of physical pain, hardship, death, or threat of death. So Silas, for example, displays that his job as a constable, he puts himself in physical danger, or he has the chance of putting himself in physical danger all the time. Look at his, response to Wallace going after him and such. So he displays physical courage. And also, standing up for Cindy. It's physical courage to go up to two grown men at the age of 12, 13, 14, and say, hey, stop. That's also moral courage, though, where you have the ability to act rightly in the face of popular opposition, shame, scandal, discouragement, or personal loss. And this is something Silas realized he struggled with, the idea of moral courage, which has caused this extreme case of loneliness in the character of Larry, because he's been ostracized by society. And I really want to focus on this quotation that displays loneliness so poignantly. A little background info. This is the beginning of the quote is Larry talking about his time in the military, when sometimes, you had to go on treks and you didn't have anything to eat for a while. And he ties that into the idea of what loneliness is like. He found the first skipped meals were the hardest, the hunger a hollow ache. The longer he went without eating, though, the second day, the third, the pain would subside from an ache to the memory of an ache, and finally to only the memory of a memory. Until you ate, you didn't know how hungry you were, how empty you'd become. Wallace's visits had shown him that being lonesome was his own fast, that after going unnourished for so long, even the foulest bite could remind your body how much it needed to eat, that you could be starving and not even know it. This is a really important quote because here Larry realizes he knew that there was something wrong with Wallace. Larry is a very intelligent, empathetic, emotional person. He has a rich inner life. So as far as the outer life, this loneliness and this abandonment, he lives in his novels and in his words and such. But he accepted Wallace's friendship because he realized once someone wanted him as a friend or a confidant or whatever it may be, it didn't matter how horrible it was. It didn't matter how skewed or dirty or foul the friendship or the person offering it was. It was something. It was nourishment for his soul. Yeah. So that's really loneliness. Here's another poignant aspect of loneliness. This is a quotation of the description of Silas's mother accepting hand-me-down clothing from Larry's family. Now, you have to imagine this woman had become pregnant, had worked for Larry's mother and father, nursing Larry, meaning being his nanny, his nurse. This was a really, really, really common part of the Deep South, is that very often Black women were employed as nurses, meaning they raised the kids up until school age. They were like mother figures to them. And she lost her job when Alice realized she was pregnant from, her husband. We don't know what the circumstances were. So Alice goes to Chicago. She has this child. Then there's desperate circumstances. She comes back desperate, poor, with this little boy in tow, lives illegally, so to speak, not necessarily legally, but in this poor little shack, and is really dependent on the goodwill of this family. And when Alice is given this hand-me-down, she, realizes at some point Alice slipped one arm and then the other into the coat sleeve. So she didn't want to accept it, but she did. She buttoned its buttons, starting at the top, Silas had followed her, still not seeing what an emblem of defeat, shame, loss, hopelessness the code was. With such gaps in his understanding, he saw very clearly how the boy he'd been had grown up to be the man he was. So these secrets that were kept for him, not knowing who his father was, not knowing the suffering his mother went through and what she's given up to make a life for him. You know, he judged his mom very harshly, he didn't have a very close relationship with her. And he realized how lonely she had been, how difficult it must have been for her. So this brings us to the end of the themes, because towards the end, or at the end of the book, you know, there's this big resolution of at least, you know, who killed the Rutherford girl. And this resolution of that Larry was not the murderer of Cindy Walker. It was probably her stepfather. That there's this idea of forgiveness. Now, all the power is given to Larry now. He is not the bad guy anymore. And he's allowed to make a decision. It's the first decision in his life. He has the power for the first time. Will he forgive? And Larry felt, because he has many people and characters to forgive. Wallace for shooting him. The entire town for ostracizing him. The constable or the detective, not Silas, but his boss, for constantly harassing him, for anything that went wrong. And then, of course, Silas for his betrayal. And it's interesting because the easiest forgiveness is for Wallace. So Larry felt a strange forgiveness for him because all monsters were misunderstood. He realized he'd been that monster, not because he really was a monster, but because society saw him as such and attributed all of these qualities, and he was completely misunderstood. And there must be something in Wallace that is misunderstood. Not that he's a good person, but he forgives him for shooting him. He was a sad, sick character. His forgiveness for Silas comes much more difficult for him. And this is also really important. So Silas works very hard at building a relationship post, the resolution of this entire ordeal. And Larry's a little bit reticent. He doesn't accept it at first. It's very hard for him to understand and forgive his half-brother for all of the things that had happened. So that brings us to the end of the novel and the end of the presentation. We have a few moments left for questions, comments, ideas, concerns, things you'd like to ask me or us, things you didn't understand. If there are any, go ahead. I would like to hear from you. If you do not have any questions, then thank you guys for listening. And for those of you who are signing off because you have no more questions, or you don't want to stay around for the questions, good luck on your Abitur. But for the others, we're waiting for some comments or questions.
Maximilian asked a question, how did Silas get off the hook again?
No, yes, that's a very good question. It's not that we have to understand the idiom to let yourself off the hook. That means to be on the hook for something means that you have to face the consequences for something. You're on the hook for that. If your teacher says, hey, Maximilian, you're on the hook for that, that means they caught you doing something and now you have to face the consequences. Now, Silas let himself off the hook, meaning that for many of the actions or inactions, he didn't face consequences. He got out of it. He didn't stand up and say, okay, look, Larry wasn't there. It wasn't the last one. It was me. Or my mother wasn't this person, or I treated my mother badly, and I should have been nicer and more understanding, and so on and so on and so on. So he thinks about himself and realizes that he never fully took consequences for his actions or his inaction. That means letting himself off the hook. I hope I answered your question, Maximilian.
He also said courage, loneliness, forgiveness are great topics to remember for the Abitur. Thanks. I'm going through it again because one person said we didn't answer the questions, but didn't see anything. The person said, okay, this is about the earlier questions that you pose. me see if there's
Maybe we
anything
missed
else.
it. We'll see. We'll scroll back.
Yeah, going back. Okay, this is about the book covers. This was already mentioned. Not a question.
Maybe we missed it or you didn't type it. Is that possible?
Maybe. If you have any questions, feel free to pose them right now. This is your chance. Last chance, basically.
Last chance. Going once. Going twice. No, we're still here a couple minutes.
And there were already, again, some questions about how long this will be up. It will be up until the English Abitur, which is on April 28th. So in a couple weeks after Easter. So you have enough time to prepare. You can review this on our channel. The video will be up afterwards, and tomorrow's talk as well.
And there's also a possibility, you know, we also offer private lessons. If you want to, even if you just want to book like an hour to practice your communication or your writing, you can always contact the d.a.i. We have expert teachers that help, you know, prepare you for the Abi. If you haven't gotten enough tonight.
Exactly. Or if you want to be in a group course, we also offer something during the Easter break, an intensive course for the Abitur-Prüfung specifically.
And I can teach your little brothers and sisters because I'll be doing the 5th and 6th graders.
Awesome. There's a question. Do you think Larry and Silas became friends at the end, or are they starting to rebuild it? Like
I think that's exactly. I think Silas is actively trying to rebuild it. And then if you look at the character from Larry, I think he'll accept it because he's so lonely. And I think Silas has really made a good evolution in his character, that he's more accepting and forthcoming. And I think Larry is a forgiving person to begin with. And I do think it's a very hopeful end. So, but you never know.
Another one writes, if Silas didn't speak up about the Cindy Walker case because of racism, then why didn't Larry?
Why didn't Larry speak up? Yeah, that's a really good question. I always wondered that as well. I think, you know, Larry perhaps wanted to protect his friend, because Larry did know that it was Silas, right? Am I getting it wrong now? Either way, I personally think that he wanted to protect his friend. And he's a more shy, reticent character to begin with. He's not an outspoken person. You know, to defend himself is not something that he was able to do throughout the book. So it's not really a surprise that he just, you know, was rolled over, so to speak.
And it's again about the topic of courage. Do you have enough courage to really speak up and like stand up for someone? That's not an easy feat, right?
No, that's very difficult.
Let me see. A couple of the participants said, I just wanted to say thanks very much for this presentation. It's an interesting way of reviewing this important topic. Thank you that this was a wonderful presentation. This is a good question. Can you say something about the role of guns in Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter? It was a task in our last class test.
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard task. Oh, we'd have to take a look. So I haven't reread this book in a couple of years now. And I never read it for this question per se. So I would have to reread it and look at the role of the gun. I do think that Gran Torino is a much better example for the role of the gun in American society than Crooked Letter. We can find the role. I mean, obviously, you know, Larry was shot with the gun, and it's prevalent there. But I think it's less of a commentary on the role of the gun in the novel than you would have in the film, for example. So it's not a good example for that kind of question. You can disagree with me.
There's another question. How can you in some way evaluate the behavior of Larry? Larry's mother. Oh, it says.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Larry's mother. Yeah. So I think if we look at loneliness, we don't get much information about her except for that she's, very, 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 very attached to her son and very worried and bemothering him and trying to protect him from his father and, praying with him at night that he gets a friend. And I also think that this was an extremely lonely character. Her husband is not supportive. Her son is ostracized. She doesn't seem to have a really tight social network besides church. She has a hard life in the sense of, I think she ends up in an older people home for a while, and I might be mixing something up here again, but I think her behavior stems from desperation to have the best for her child and not being able to force society to accept her kid the way he is. She truly loves her son, and she wishes that he had it easier. And the only thing she can turn to is religion. She doesn't know what else she could turn to. She tries to do her best, so to speak. I think that's the best way to explain her.
The student says, like in some way, she protects Larry in front of his father.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, she sticks with the rules and boundaries Larry's father puts in place.
Yes. And she doesn't have a choice. She's probably psychologically and emotionally abused by this man. I mean, the whole family was abused by this man. And she's scared. And to speak up and to fight against it in this kind of, also very conservative community, we can assume, is not easy. So, but yeah, she protects him the best she can.
Okay, someone says, thanks for the presentation. And another one, I want to thank everyone for the presentation too. I would love to have you as my English teacher.
I would love to be your English teacher. No, you can always, we're in the d.a.i.
You can find us.
We enjoy teaching you guys. And I love talking about the Abi topics. So.
Exactly. And if you have any follow-up questions, as I mentioned in the chat, you can write an email to rentanamerican@d.a.i-tübingen.de, and then I will forward the questions to Jess, and she can answer them for me, because I'm not the expert, she is. So thank you so much, Jess, for presenting, and thank you to the students for participating in the chat. Again, this will be up. Don't worry about it. You can review it. And I hope I see you tomorrow for the presentation on Gran Torino.
Should also be very interesting. You guys should come. My colleague does a good job with that too. All right, everybody.
All right.
Have a good evening.
night. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.